Welcome to Looks Good on Paper, the podcast that's flipping the script on traditional hiring. We're your hosts, I'm Woody.
And I'm Anita.
And in each episode, we dive into why CVs and the so-called perfect candidate can be misleading. We'll be speaking with industry experts to uncover how skills, potential, and real-world experience should be the focus when making hiring decisions. We're here to challenge the norm and rewrite the rules of hiring. So let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Looks Good on Paper. This week we are delighted to be joined by David Hiford from Hitachi Rail, lead talent acquirer within the business. So very excited to get your opinion on, I guess, what looks good on paper means to you. So how do you challenge the use of CVs and the traditional recruitment methods of the modern day that should probably be relegated to the past? Anita is also joining us from Bali, which is awesome. So amazing. Any fun things going on in Bali, Anita?
It's hot. It's one season for a whole year, and I have not seen any monkeys yet, which I'm so sad about. But it's lovely here, and I feel like I'm on like a field trip. But it's late at night for me right now, so that's been really fun navigating that.
Nice. Yeah, well, thank you for joining us late night. Rather than me trying to do your introduction, David, I would love to hand over to you and just get a quick background on yourself and obviously your role over at Hitachi Rail. And then I'll jump into our first question.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me. Really excited to be here. The talent acquisition lead for Hitachi Rail. I've been here now for 2.5 years. Before that, I spent nearly 4 years in recruitment in both New Zealand and the UK. So I first got into recruitment whilst I was working and living in New Zealand, worked for one of the big global agency brands, and then came back to the UK at the start of 2022. I spent a few months in an agency role back in the UK and then moved into my role internally here at Hitachi Rail. The real driver for me going internal was the project that we had at Hitachi Rail. We were going through a merger, a separation from a much larger company into a standalone kind of holding company, and then into a merger into an even bigger company. And so that interim period of setting up processes, streamlining everything that we could do, really redesigning how we recruited, that was the real attraction and driver for me into taking this role, and what's kept me engaged and happy for the last few years as well.
Nice.
Yeah, I bet. Working for 3 different companies whilst also working at the same company is quite a unique experience, especially in 2.5 years, right?
Yeah.
So let's dive into the questions. The first question, and we ask the same 3 questions of every recruitment leader that we speak to. And the first question is, what's the biggest hiring mistake that you see companies make time and time again, even though they know, candidates know that it's probably not working?
For me, one of the most kind of obvious, when you think about it, answers to that question is the career switchers kind of answer. So, I look at job adverts all day long, whether they be my own or somebody else's or other companies. You see so often that, and it links to that other point of experience not always equaling competence. Not considering people that can come from a different background, not considering project managers that used to be engineers, for example. Some of our project managers in Hitachi Rail used to be engineers, and they're absolutely great at what they do because they understand how to run the project, but also how to run the engineering side of the project. Adding into that things like people coming back from maternity or paternity leave, people coming out of the military, and switching a career from what could have been a very linear pathway for the last 20 years in a military role, then going into civilian society. That career switch, there's so much opportunity there that a lot of businesses just don't tap into and are afraid to tap into for the sake of having to spend a little bit of time at the start training somebody up, then having some of the most motivated people you'll ever see. I've recruited recently in a data science role, and I had so many people reach out to me saying, I work in a different field altogether, but data fascinates me, and I've gone away and I've researched it myself. I've studied myself. I've self-funded through different various courses, etc. I really want to get into data. So there's a real opportunity and a wealth of talent there available that doesn't just necessarily have the experience on the CV that a lot of companies just ask for.
It's true. It's so funny. I always bring this up as well when we talk about, competency-based or skills-based hiring. I'm a marketer and a fractional CMO, and I don't have a degree in marketing. And I think about just like through jobs and people giving me a chance, I was actually able to show that I could do the job and do it well. And I've been now in this field for 15 years. Like, just who would I have been if I didn't get that shot? Or if somebody said, let's give Anya a chance and look at her over someone who has a marketing degree.
Yeah, definitely. Those transferable skills, I think we discussed earlier, I studied radio production at university. I'm working in a talent acquisition role, but what that gives me is the ability to interview people, to talk to people, to actively listen, to engage people, to write copy, to write adverts in a different tone of voice. So all of those different skills that I learned in my degree that doesn't necessarily land me in a HR position.
It's true.
How much of it do you think is, you talked about the sort of unwillingness to train an individual up that is switching careers. How much of it is that versus a hiring manager just not feeling confident that they know what skills somebody has? So you talked about, obviously, the person not being able to display those skills on a CV, and the hiring manager basically looking at it and going, yeah, well, how do I know that this person is any good and that they are going to be coachable in what we do?
Yeah, I think there is obviously an element of the unknown that will always come along with that. But yeah, it's a valid point. If you're looking for a particular set of skills and you see that those, traditionally you see those skills always come from the same place and the same linear career pathway, there's an education piece there for the hiring managers around, where else could these skills be acquired from. I think there's also a bit of an education piece for the general candidate market as well, in how to market your own skills, how to engage with companies and recruiters and really sell yourself in terms of everything that you can do, rather than what you have done. I think there's got to be that kind of shift from what you have done to what you can do, and that's what that's the potential you can unlock in that career switcher conversation.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think that's the thing about why we want to get rid of the CV is it doesn't work for either party. It's not like it's great for candidates. Yeah, once you've written it, you can send it to everybody, but it actually doesn't tell people how good you are or whether you've got the skills to be successful. Okay, great. Next question. What's a hidden bias that companies unknowingly have, even when they think, oh, do you know what? We've put in loads of progressive new initiatives as a business. Like, what's the thing that gets left behind that maybe, I mean, part of your first answer probably is one of the hidden biases, but can you think of any others?
There's so many, and we'll see so many more that are not necessarily unconscious any longer, especially with, the global trend towards DEI policies that's driven, mainly out of the US. But I think looking back on my kind of agency career, I spent the majority of my agency career recruiting in finance. And not to pick on finance, but it's a particularly bad industry to recruit for in terms of bias. In the UK finance market, for example, you'll have hiring managers who say, I only want candidates who studied ACA, not ACCA and not CMA, got to be ACA candidates. And that's not even unconscious bias at that point. That that's very overt bias, but that kind of attitude then flows down through to where did they go to university, did they go to a Russell Group university, and it links into that experience bracket as well. Where have they worked before, have they done this before, have they done that before. It lends itself to hiring in that kind of conformity bias model, where you stick to what you know what you know, you know the qualifications, you know the universities, and you end up with a homogenous workforce, which it then creates all sorts of other DEI issues and lack of strength in a lot of organisations because that diversity just isn't there any longer. So the kind of hidden unconscious bias there is probably around, that confirmation bias or conformity bias around, does this person look, sound, have the same experience as me? And the important thing that we've tried to do at Hitachi Rail is work with our hiring managers to say, we all have bias. It's important that, everybody has it. We have to acknowledge that we have it, but we then need to work against it in these kind of scenarios. Be conscious of it. Yes, you may look at somebody who's gone to the same university as you and you have a common ground to begin a conversation from. That does not mean that they will have the same experience as you, does not mean they'll have the same knowledge and expertise as you. It just means that they happen to go to a certain place in the country at the same as you did. So I think that's one of the hardest ones. And we've worked with you guys at Willow in our early careers recruitment for a few years now, and particularly at that graduate recruitment level, stripping away the universities that the candidates went to is really, really useful, because that, particularly at early careers level, obviously we need to know, they're studying a relevant degree. For example, if they're coming into an engineering grad scheme, that they've studied engineering, for example, but where they've studied, it's not important. So I think
it's not relevant.
Exactly. I think that's one of the biggest ones. And as I say, I don't particularly want to pick on finance, but it was fairly overt in that sense, where
really,
yeah,
it's conformity bias. I don't think people call it that very often, but because I always say, oh, nobody gets fired for choosing IBM, that old adage, just like nobody gets fired for using Microsoft or whatever. It's the same. Like, I think people just have that fear and therefore conform, and everybody looks like this in the company, so that we know that works. That's the dangerous thing, is a few individuals that look and sound a specific way perform, so we'll hire all of our people that look and sound like that, and we'll forget the ones that didn't perform. We'll forget the ones that we actually got rid of, because these few are such top performers. So yeah, that's a really good conformity bias, something to be conscious of in the future. Okay, so our next question, and then we've got our wild card, which Anita will present to you. The next question is, if you can remember, it'd be awesome if you can think of a specific individual. What's the most surprising hire that you've ever made, and how did their success defy what looked good on paper?
I've got an example where this is both good and bad, in all honesty. So we'll start with the good. I hired a guy probably about 6 months into my role at Hitachi Rail, where on paper didn't have a wealth of experience in the particular field that I hired them into. Yeah, they were not a career switcher, but they had been certainly got experience across multiple types of roles, not always in the same kind of space. They kind of engaged well during kind of my screening processes. They'd come to interview and performed well, but there were still other people in the process that were much more experienced in that particular field. Through the process, we decided to go with this guy, brought him into the team, spent a little bit of time, nurturing him into the role, and kind of almost 2 years down the line, he's now training other people. He's really, really settled into his role. I even have comments from managers in other departments about him, about how good he is at his role, and how well he works with the team, and how well his role integrates with different people from the project across the business.
Love that.
From a positive standpoint, that was a really, really positive example. On the flip side, I also hired somebody.
I'm excited about this one now. I always love bad recruitment stories.
Yeah, on the flip side, I hired somebody from a direct competitor who had come to us and said, look, I really like what you're doing, like the look of this role. I know the hiring manager from just being in the industry. Really want to work for that hiring manager. On paper, had all the experience we wanted, if not maybe a little bit more experience than we needed. But, we were like, this guy really wants to come over. Our hiring manager had such an attraction for him that, he wanted to come and work for him and leave his current role. Like, this sounds great. Brought him in, and within a few months, we realised that we'd potentially made a bad hire. The stakeholder engagement piece was quite off. There was, little bits here and there where it wasn't really the best hire that we made. And then, via mutual consent, that person left the business still within their probation period. So on paper, everything looked great. They were a direct competitor. We were, exact example of experience that the rest of the team had. We worked on the same tools, same technologies. On paper, couldn't have been a better hire, but in reality, didn't work out whatsoever. But I'll focus on the first story, though, the more positive aspect.
Those are the wins. We want to hear the stories of the wins. I think it's so nice when you see someone thrive, when you like the unexpected ones, right? I mean, I've been a hiring manager before for my line of business, a lot of companies I worked at. And I think sometimes there's just like this gut intuition for me where it's like, oh, this person shows up in these different ways, or I can see through this process. And like you said, this other person was up against lots of candidates that probably had more experience, but there's something about that person, and I'm not sure what it is sometimes, but it works. And then you see them grow, and it's amazing. And this really segues well into the wildcard question for you, David. So how do you spot potential when it doesn't always follow the rules?
I think for me, that the very basic principle it has to go down to is, do you feel like this is a good person? Ultimately, it's why talent acquisition is so hard. It's because your product, for example, is people, and people are very unreliable. The most unreliable product you'll ever work with, probably. People have free will, and they have lots of nuances that you need to deal with every single time. But it comes down to every organization is only as strong as the people that works for it. And If the people that work for the organization are good people at their core and at their heart, the business should thrive. We, as people who also work for the business, should, be able to bring them on board and bring them on the journey with us. So there's so many different metrics that you can assess. That everyone's got a different opinion on what you should assess and what you can assess. So in the face of all of that, if there's nothing else to go on, I would personally go on my assessment of whether this is a good person or not.
Yeah, or put them through a Willow with some skills-based hiring questions.
Yeah, exactly.
See if they're coachable, see if you can grow them in that role. Super simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shameless that, Anita.
That's the plug.
But so true.
Where's the lie, Woody?
Brilliant answer. Thank you, David. So thank you so much for coming on the Looks Good on Paper podcast. It's been awesome to hear your very quick overview. My biggest takeaway is to really think about conformity bias and how we can, I guess, raise awareness in individuals that, conforming to what they believe, their perception of conformity or, process, and not really challenging what that means in their organization and what good looks like off paper is, leading to them potentially hiring the wrong people, much like the example that you gave. I feel like we could do a whole podcast, Anita, just asking for war stories of where things have gone wrong as well. I think that could be very entertaining. Maybe we just do one episode where we just cut all of those. But thank you, David, so much for joining us on the podcast, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thanks, David. Bye. So thanks for tuning in to Looks Good on Paper. We hope today's conversation helps you rethink what really matters when it comes to hiring. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your network, and stay tuned for more insightful discussions that are shaking up the entire hiring process. Catch us next time as we continue to challenge the status quo. Until then, remember, it's not what looks good on paper, it's what they can do.